Negative motivation has always been the most effective way to inspire me, which is why I absolutely needed to live the experiences in this chapter. This is chapter 5. My 1 year tour in Korea was behind me now, but I never could have imagined the barren, desolate view that awaited for me outside the window of my new guard shack. And I had never even heard of this Osama bin Laden guy when I first arrived in Saudi Arabia. But only 6 days after I got here, that would all change when his buddies hijacked airliners and killed thousands of Americans. You know the story. I was on shift when I heard the news come over the handheld radio. And then when I got off and went back to the dormitory, I remember being gathered in the day room with a couple dozen other young airmen all around the little TV set, where we discovered that we were sleeping within 100 miles of this bin Laden guy's hometown. If you've been with me since chapter 1, you're not surprised to hear me say that this excited me. I felt like I was finally going to get a chance to be useful and do something important, be relevant to the mission. And it felt like things were getting interesting. We had to wear a helmet and flak vest everywhere we went, anytime we were outdoors. And when I was on shift, I was a little more alert, looking for things that were out of the ordinary. But it didn't take me long to realize that the terrorists weren't coming for me. So the best use for my M16 rifle in that little guard shack with the sandy plywood floor was to lay the rifle across my lap, put my math book on top of it to keep it from sliding in between my knees so I could do my math homework. So here we are, our nation is at war, and I'm in this hostile part of the world, but I still felt purposeless, like there was no reason for me to be there. So I had to wrestle with those thoughts and the boredom of staring out at the desolation and thinking about how my purpose needs to be bettering myself so that I can get to the point where I can fly airplanes in the military, and then I'll be doing something important, and then I'll have purpose. But I still felt guilty when I thought about those special operators who were out there in the mountains of Afghanistan flushing terrorists out of caves while I sat in my little guard shack solving for X. And I try to think of it as, hey, I'm going to take advantage of these opportunities. It's not my fault that the base that I'm at offers college classes and has a Baskin Robbins. When my deployment to Saudi Arabia was over, they sent me back to my new duty station just outside of Honolulu, Hawaii, Hickam Air Force Base. And they paired me up for flight line security duty one day with a young man named Ryan. He was about the same age as I was, but he was very different from me. He spoke in a very matter-of-fact tone, but very calm and peaceful. He would say something like, when the airplanes are taxiing in, you'll want to move the vehicle to the back of the ramp over here in the corner and just sit there. If you get in their way, they'll flash their lights at you, so pay attention to that. And he said it without any profanity. And for one of my coworkers to say even one or two sentences without profanity was really odd. He also didn't have any grievances or complaints, which I found very strange, but also very refreshing. And I was really taken aback when he said, when you start feeling down about sitting out here all day and bored and really hating your job, just look around and take in how beautiful it is. Look at all the lush greenery and just realize how lucky you are to live in Hawaii. I had never heard any of my coworkers talk that way before, and I really liked it, even though I wasn't quite ready to adopt that mindset just yet. But I could have really used that mindset on the day that I was assigned to the most torturous post on the flight line for a young airman who really wanted to fly airplanes. The Air Force Base shared part of the flight line with the Honolulu International Airport. So way back out by itself, there was this section where they parked 2 alert aircraft, 2 F-15 fighter jets. And they each parked under a covered hangar, and in the middle was a facility where the pilots stayed. And surrounding the area, it was fenced on 3 sides like this. And this area right here across was about 100 yards across, and it was a red line painted on the ground. So my job was to walk that line for 50 minutes at a time, and then I could sit in the shack and rest for 10 minutes. So imagine what it was like to be walking down this red line about maybe 80 to 100 yards long, down and back in the blazing sun, where I could just smell the asphalt cooking under my boots, just sweating with the humidity, and just walking back and forth like I was an actual deterrent, like there were terrorists hiding in the coconut trees just waiting to attack these airplanes. I mean, here I had been to Saudi Arabia in this hostile part of the world, right? And I didn't even feel like there was any threat there. So it was hard to stay motivated and be thinking that I was actually needed on this post. And what made it worse was the airplanes would scramble sometimes for an exercise. So the pilots would come out and they would, get in the airplanes and start it up. And I was so close to them that like I could see their faces, I could see their eyes, like I could see these people who were living the life that I wanted to live. Because I thought about how important they must have felt with that responsibility of protecting the islands, right? Anytime an unidentified aircraft was approaching, it was their job to go up there and to check them out. And if they were deemed a threat, then obviously they would shoot them down. So for people to have that kind of training and responsibility, I was just so impressed by that. And so it was just so hard for me to be physically so close to what I wanted to be, but yet feel so far away from that. It was hard to keep going some days. So I knew that I had to get off the flight line. I could not be around this anymore. Some people would see it as motivation for what they wanted to be. So that was the fighter jets right there. And then just over the line on the other side were the large airliners from the international airport taxiing out. And again, I could see these people, they weren't serving an important purpose like military pilots, but at the same time, they had this responsibility, and the training, and they had this really cool job, and they were taking people to where they needed to go, where they wanted to go. And I just longed to have that sort of purpose and responsibility in my vocation. So this was just too hard for me. I knew I needed to get off the flight line. I just didn't want to see this anymore. I just wanted to keep my head down and focus on what I needed to be doing. I felt like a back kitchen worker at an all-you-can-eat buffet, right? Who comes through the doors carrying the plates to restock for all these wealthy gluttons, and he smells all the great food that's out there, but that's not for him, right? He just is tasked with going to set the plates out there for them, and then he has to go back into his hole, back in the kitchen, and that's how I felt. So there was one way for me to get off of walking this red line and get off the flight line for good, and that was by applying to be a member of the Elite Guard. Pacific Air Force's Elite Guard. These were the group of troops that guarded the headquarters building and the general's offices and all that. So I applied and I was accepted to join, and it turned out to be a really good strategic decision, even though there was really nothing elite about the Elite Guards except for the uniform. We were supposed to dress really fancy because we were around high-ranking officers all the time and dignitaries from other countries as well. So it was mostly about image and just a little tiny bit about security and protection. But when the generals were in, there was a lot of high-ranking people coming in and out. And in the Air Force, most high-ranking people are pilots. So it was a great opportunity for me to observe these individuals up close and to even start up conversations with them. I found that most of them were friendly. They liked talking about what they were doing and how they got there, even though sometimes the conversations were very awkward because I was so low ranking. So I had to remember, the customs and courtesies and showing respect to the rank. There were a lot of sirs and ma'ams and standing at attention and all that kind of stuff. But still, I got to learn a lot about that world. And every morning at 5:30 a.m., I got to go behind the scenes when I escorted 2 civilian cleaning personnel into the command section to go into the actual general's offices and straighten up and clean the glass and all that kind of stuff. And I felt a sense of reverence because I knew that most junior enlisted never got to even see the general's office. And here I was looking around at his, personal effects and pictures and all that kind of stuff, and just imagining what it would be like to be sitting at this giant desk, mahogany desk with these tufted leather chairs and couches in his office, and it was pretty impressive. One Saturday morning, I was at my post upstairs in front of the command section doors, and the hallways were dark. Nobody else was around. And then up the stairs comes the vice commander of all of the air forces in the Pacific region, 3-star general, General Peterson, with his black lab. So he comes in, he had some stuff to do in the office, and I'm thinking, okay, I've seen this guy before. He's always been relatively friendly demeanor with a wave and a smile. And now he's here in civilian clothes, no shiny stars on his shoulder. He's got his friendly black lab with him. I'm thinking, all right, this is my chance. This is my chance. So I wait for him to come out. He's only in the office for about 10 or 15 minutes. He comes out, and I said, "Sir, do you have a second?" And he stopped and gave me his full attention. He said, "Yeah, sure." So I told him, "I'm hoping to get into an ROTC program so that I can become a pilot in the Air Force." would you have any advice for how I can get a pilot training slot? And he responded, well, you should start working on your private pilot license now because that will make you more competitive. And then he asked me, what school are you planning on going to? And I said, well, I'm planning on going to Southwest Texas, which is in San Marcos, Texas. And he responds, oh, I'm from Texas. Perfect, I thought. So I decided to take the general's advice. And the next thing I knew, I found myself at the Honolulu International Airport, strapped into a little 4-seater low-wing airplane. And when I put the headset on over my ears, I thought, oh no, what am I doing here? I couldn't understand anything. It was so fast. And even if they slowed it down, the terminology wasn't making sense anyway. I watched my instructor flipping switches and pushing buttons, and all of a sudden the propeller starts spinning. The airplane starts shaking, rattling, and I'm thinking, whoa, what am I doing here? He shows me how to use the pedals for taxiing the airplane. So I'm trying to stay on this little yellow line by pushing the left pedal, oh, pushed it too much, pushing the right pedal, and I'm all over the place, just going back and forth across this line. He helps me steady it out, and before I knew it, we were lined up on the runway, this long, flat concrete surface. We push the power up to get the airplane rolling. The engine gets a lot louder. The airplane starts shaking even more. We're going down the runway at about 60 miles an hour. He tells me to pull back, and I start pulling back, and I was just in awe as this ground started to drop away from underneath us. And I could see more of the ocean out to my right side, the beautiful blue water, all the lush green valleys and the mountains in front of me. But those beautiful green mountains were disrupting the airflow from the wind, so it was actually pretty rough. We're getting bounced around pretty good. He takes me out into the practice area and just starts having me get a feel for the airplane, doing some turns and some climbs and descents. And I'm starting to think for a little bit, maybe I could do this. We'll see. Then it's time to come back to the airport for the landing, and he wants me to keep it lined up, go in a certain direction at a certain altitude, and I'm just all over the place, struggling to keep it where I want it to be, and the turbulence is bumping us around. And then we're lined up with the runway, gonna come back in and land, and he says, you want to land it? I said, no, I can't do this, you take it. And he just made it look so easy as he was explaining to me what he was doing, but it just didn't make any sense to me. So while it was an amazing experience, I loved looking outside and kind of the way the airplane felt. I was also overwhelmed, and I was thinking, realistically, can I do this? And so leaving the airport, driving out with my windows down, feeling that sea breeze come in, I wanted to feel proud of myself, like I was bravely taking on this new endeavor. But instead I felt like a duck that had just flown by a duck blind and took one in the wing. And I felt silly for having this whole idea of wanting to be a pilot that I realized was kind of based on image and the need for responsibility without the consideration as to whether I could even do it or not. But I'd made a promise to myself, and so with no indication at all whatsoever that I should continue down this path, I kept on my studies, and I got another job delivering pizzas in the evening, and then another job working security at the airport on my days off so that I could pay for flying lessons. Life became a real grind at this point, but I felt good about it because I had all these little boxes and I was just going down the line, putting check marks in boxes, getting it done, one step closer to my goal. Years later, I would make a friend at my local airport in Idaho, a man named Bob, who was a retired fighter pilot. He was actually a commander at one of the fighter squadrons out there. And he was telling me how he was preparing to go back to New Hampshire to visit and to fly a little airplane to commemorate the 50th anniversary of his first solo flight. Solo flights are a big deal to all pilots, even the old ones who don't even remember the names of their grandchildren. They'll tell you all the details of the first time they soloed an airplane. I remember what airport I soloed at, John Rogers Field on Oahu, but I can't even tell you what runway I took off on. Because my solo flight was just another box to check, I missed out on what should have been one of my most treasured memories. Unfortunately, checking boxes was my new approach to life, and without knowing it, I was hardwiring myself to miss out on some of the greatest memories and experiences that were going to happen in my life in the next few years. And that's chapter 5. I really appreciate you watching. I hope you come along for chapter 6. Bye.